Hey everybody, in this video we're talking about the minimum wage. Nothing controversial there, right? Well, a little controversial. In fact, I think what's going to happen in this video is anybody watching it's going to have some parts that they don't love and then some other parts they probably think are okay. Now, here's the deal, okay? When you're talking about something as controversial as this, there's going to be positives and negatives, and we're going to do our best to highlight both of them. But what we want to really do at the very beginning of this video is talk about something so important as far as the lens of how economists look at things. There is a specific policy, and hey, the minimum wage is a specific policy, and then there is the policy goal. So I want to talk about the policy goal of the minimum wage first. The policy goal is to provide income supports for low-income people to reduce income inequality in society. And here at Econ Busters, we think that that is a very good goal, okay? That's a very important point I want to make at the outset because I am going to be a little bit tough at times on the minimum wage as the policy to bring about that policy goal. Again, at Econ Busters, guys, we think market-based economies are probably the best way to go if you want growth and prosperity in your country. However, there are some real issues with market-based economies, and the biggest is probably income inequality. But you can address it. You can continue to go with a market-based economy and address income inequality, and there are so many ways via tax credits, wage subsidies, income subsidies, UBI, universal basic income, different types of transfers. Not that I'm arguing for any specific one of them. I'm just saying there's a lot of policies to get after this policy goal, and the minimum wage is just one of those policies, and perhaps one of those other policies or a couple of, or a few of those other policies might be a better way to get to the policy goal of, again, providing more income to households and to reduce the income inequality that is brought about when you have market-based economies that have a lot of positives but definitely have some negatives. So let's get to it. The minimum wage. The minimum wage is a price control, specifically a price floor, okay? It is setting a minimum price. So you can see that price floor being put right in there, okay? The wage can go above it, but it can't go below it. I am drawing this graph showing the minimum wage as being binding, as restricting the market, as being effective. That's another way to say it. That this is going to be the wage that prevails because this minimum wage is above the market wage. Anytime you put a price floor above it, it is binding. It is effective. It is going to be the wage or the price that prevails. Very important. Now, let's talk about that market wage for a second. Very important. It's just another type of market price. And we say market price or market wage, what we mean is that is where the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are going to equal. We don't have shortages or surpluses. The market wage or market price clears the market, okay? When we bring in a price control, generally we're going to get an imbalance, and that imbalance is either a shortage or a surplus. If it is a price floor, the imbalance is a surplus. Now, let me say something very important as we get into this. I have drawn these curves rather elastic, okay? There's a lot of arguments about the elasticities of these curves. We could, or there's definitely many arguments that say supply of labor and demand of labor might be very inelastic. And generally, what we would think here at Econ Busters is, yes, those curves are probably much more inelastic in the short run, but what generally happens with all our elasticity measurements, price elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply, is over time our elasticity gets greater, okay? That is the teaching of economics. Over time, elasticity gets greater. So if you don't like how flat those two curves are, because they're going to show this kind of large surplus, and your argument is they are much more inelastic, much steeper, and the surplus would be much less. I think you're right in the short run, but I do want you to think longer term. Would these curves become flatter, and would those surpluses become bigger? That's a big question, okay? Now, I also want to talk about the shapes of the curves, okay? Demand for labor, that is our businesses out there. So important to understand this, that we are now in a factor market, no longer a product market. Kind of what you associate with the households and the businesses get flipped between supply and demand. Again, it's not a product market, it's a factor market. So the demander is the businesses, okay? And we generally think of this as being a downward sloping line. If you get into factor markets, you'll talk about marginal revenue product, the marginal benefit of an additional worker. And generally what we get from that is a a downward sloping line, I think it comports pretty well with our logic, okay? That as that wage gets higher and higher and higher, that cost of labor gets more and more, we're going to demand less and less of it, okay? Now, the supply of labor. If you're in a micro class and you talk about an individual supply of labor, you might get to the point that you're talking about how a supply of labor does actually bend backwards. That's right. The supply of labor for an individual does bend backwards. But when it bends backwards is at very high wages, generally speaking, okay? And what they're basically doing is they've made so much money that they are now wanting to engage in more leisure as their wage goes up, okay? As their wage goes up, they've made enough that the marginal utility from additional wages is very small, and they don't want to miss out on the leisure. But at lower wages, I think we can be fairly certain that the supply of labor is upward sloping as drawn, okay? So again, an individual supply of labor, sure, you get that interesting curve in your micro class, but again, it only bends back at very high wages. We're at a minimum wage right now. The wages are low, upward sloping supply of labor. Now, the next thing we want to focus on is when we have a price control, what is the reaction? How do the market actors react? Let's talk about businesses first, okay? You get this movement along the line, right? So this is a price control. It's a government coming in and mandating that minimum price right there. And so you get that movement along the line. Now, we want to understand what is that, okay? This is businesses demanding less labor. It's actually called a decrease in the quantity demanded for labor, right? Decrease the quantity demanded for labor. Now, again, that's because the cost of labor is going up. Initially, there might not actually be this large decrease in the quantity demanded of labor shown by this horizontal distance, okay? So if you're not quite following me right here, just kind of bring that down, okay? That's actually how much we're saying the quantity demanded of labor is decreasing. Maybe it's quite small at the beginning, but over time, what we would think businesses would, how they'd react to these minimum wages, if they're high enough, is they would go and invest in labor-saving technologies. They would put all the more emphasis into coming up with ways to need less labor and go with a technological solution, all right? You can think of self-checkout at the grocery store just becoming better and more expansive and more efficient or something like that, all right? So that's the reaction of businesses. Now, what's also really important to understand is that you're going to get this increase in the quantity supplied, okay? That's going to be the reaction of the labor. And maybe at the beginning, the supply of labor is rather vertical, but over time, we do think it become a little bit more elastic. Now, why are we getting this increase in the quantity of supplied of labor? It's because that wage is going up and the benefits of labor are going up, okay? So you could say the opportunity cost of leisure is going up, and so people are going to say, hey, the cost of leisure is going up, I'm going to do more work, I'm going to work more. But I think what's even more important to talk about is who are these new entrants? Who are they going to be? Who are the new entrants going to be? And one of the groups that tends to come in as that minimum wage goes up are teenagers, okay? So the teenagers, they react to this. If the wages are low enough, they're not willing to give up their extracurriculars or their studies or whatever it is. And it could also be, with the teenagers, it could be college students too. So college students, all right? And so as that wage goes up, some of them that weren't coming in because they had other things to do, right? The opportunity cost of working was too much. But as that wage goes up, hey, the opportunity cost of that other thing is going up. That's what that wage is. It's that opportunity cost of whatever it was, of studying, doing extracurriculars, spending time with friends. It's going up. And so you can get these new entrants. That's part of it would be teenagers. You also see people who were formerly retired. So you could get people who were retired coming in, okay? Okay, the wage is getting up, that minimum wage is up, they come into the market. Also, you certainly get stay-at-home parents saying, okay, now it's actually worthwhile to get that daycare. So you could get some stay-at-home parents, all right? So it's important to understand you're going to get these new entrants. Now, these people were already in the market at the market wage, okay? They really needed to work, okay? They really needed to work. The opportunity cost of doing something other than working, okay? The opportunity cost, which is working, right? Or is the wage from working, of doing something else. I know that was confusing. So, if they were doing something, when they were thinking about doing something else, they said, wow, I really need to work. I really need that wage. That wage would be so beneficial to me. And so what do? They go and work, okay? That's what we're talking about here, okay? So we need to understand there's new entrants, but there's also these folks right here who are already in the market because they really needed to work. And we need to think about who they are. And these new entrants can take some jobs away from these folks, because when you go with a price control, yes, you're getting that increase in the quantity supplied. The quantity supplied is all the way out to here, but now the quantity demanded is only to there. And again, I realize I'm drawing very flat curves, and we can make them steeper, so it doesn't have to be as much as I'm showing, but still, we're just trying to get the understanding. I'm trying to draw it so it's easy to see. So if this is the quantity demanded, yes, the quantity supplied is more, but the only people who are going to end up getting a job, or the amount better, the quantity of people who are going to end up getting a job is right there. That's the quantity that are going to end up getting a job. And so you see that we can have some job loss. Now we need to take a second on this, okay, right? This is the graphical representation of this. And there are studies out there that have shown there are places minimum wages have gone into effect, and we have seen labor hiring go up, okay? So there is certainly some controversy around this. We want to acknowledge those controversies. This is simply a model, and models are not always perfect. But generally speaking, economists do believe if that minimum wage goes up enough, you are going to get some reduction in hiring. And I think the bigger thing to understand is it might be very small in the beginning, but over time, it could be a lot greater as you increase that minimum wage more and more, okay? So again, small increases in the minimum wage, perhaps not very disruptive. Maybe they don't create very big imbalances at all, not ones we need to worry about much. But we need to understand if we are pushing for substantially higher minimum wages, that may be presenting some problems, and definitely in the long run, as you're incenting businesses more and more to look for those labor-saving technologies, okay? So it's just so important to understand these responses and how that quantity is going down, quantity demand is going down, the quantity supply is going up, and so what we are left is with this surplus, okay? And that surplus has some problems, right? Or creates some problems. One of them is you could have informal markets. You could have much more hiring in the informal markets, which is a little bit problematic because that's outside of the purview of the government and the different regulations that they would bring and different labor standards that they might bring. Another thing that economists talk about when you have surpluses of labor is what that might lead to is the work environment becoming worse for the laborer. Why? Because the demander, the business, knows that there are a bunch of other laborers ready to come in and take anybody's spot. So they may fire quicker based on any types of issues they see with a laborer versus training and working with that labor, okay? I think of a parent who has sick kids and has missed several days. They're like, look, I've got this whole surplus out there. I can hire somebody else. And they might look to reduce the amount of or parents who are working that have children that are working at this wage. We need to acknowledge that surpluses can create some issues in this market because, again, the business knows that if they let somebody go, it will be very easy to hire somebody in their place, okay? So we've got the surpluses, we've got the informal markets. I want to touch about one other thing, okay? In microeconomics, when you talk about price controls, you do get into eventually talking about doing price ceilings in product markets where there's market power, and of course, another price control in a labor market where there's market power. So if there are market powers, the business has market power, meaning you've got just a few businesses hiring the workers that are out there. Price controls, yes, by the way that we do economics can increase the amount of people we hire or the amount of products that eventually get sold. So let me say that again, a little bit confusing. But when there is excessive market power, What the economics, the classical economic framework shows when there is market power on one side of the market, a price control, a ceiling in the product market, or a floor in the labor market, which is what we were doing here, can actually lead to an increase in the quantity produced in the product market and quantity hired in the labor market. But we need to ask ourselves, do we see excessive market power in this low-skilled labor market? And we might be quick to say yes, but we want to think deeply about that. What we really want to ask ourselves, is there a lot of different businesses hiring low-skilled labor out there? And I think the answer is most cities, yes. There's actually several businesses, tons of businesses that are hiring. And so there's probably not excessive market power. And in that case, what we get with the price control is what we, classically get with the market, with a price control, which is actually less exchanges taking place. All right. Now, again, the data is mixed. We want to absolutely acknowledge that. And small increases in the minimum wage, the benefits certainly might outweigh the cost. But we do want to understand what the model is showing us, okay? There might be other ways, as we said at the beginning, to address income inequality and the income levels of our low-income adults and families out there. Again, tax credits, different transfers for housing, clothing, and food. And there's also definitely increasing the unemployment compensation. And through on the healthcare side, there's different ways to provide more and more access to healthcare. So there's many ways that we could think about addressing it. This is just one policy. Is this the best policy, is what we have to ask ourselves for addressing this, because that's what economics is about. It's about decision making, and it's trying to make the optimal decisions. Market-based economies, yes, they lead to income inequality, and that income inequality can have many negative effects that we are going to want to address. But what is the right policy to go about addressing them? This is trying to be a deeper dive into the minimum wage. I hope it makes you at least think about the different issues that come about with price controls in the labor market. Hope that made sense to you. We'll see you in the next video.